I don't like telling people what to do, but when it comes to this issue specifically, I really don't mind being that guy on the internet that says, don't do this. Please don't do this with your gun. Today we're talking about modifications, specifically ones that you may use for self-defense. Whether that's your concealed carry pistol or a home defense rifle, I'm going to show you exactly what happened to one of my friends that recently did a modification to his Glock and give you some reasons why I say this is a bad idea to specifically change out a trigger in your Glock and actually give you some alternatives to changing that trigger. Let's go ahead and get into it. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. Really appreciate it. Now, let me go ahead and say, the friend of mine, he has a 23. It's a Gen 3. I borrowed it because I wanted to do videos with it, but the real reason I had it, or the main reason I had it, was because of this trigger issue. Now, he had a 3.5 pound connector in there from Ghost. He put an Angel 3 pound connector in there. And that's where we had this issue. So as you can see, you pull the trigger, it goes off. It was a better trigger pull, by the way. And then you release it, reset, and it went off again.
I'm gonna stand behind you on this one.
All right. And one time, my buddy that I was out at the range with, he actually got 2 back-to-back fires. So reset fire, and then a dead trigger after that.
I missed that one.
Ooh, that one fired 2. Yeah.
You got that on camera, right?
I did, yeah. Be careful what kind of connector you put in your Glocks, boys. Now, I know the guy that installed this connector. Connectors are really not that hard. Nothing is hard to change on the inside of a Glock, to be honest with you. You know, 3 pins or 2 pins in the case of your Gen 5. So it's not like it's a hard thing to do. And it is kind of hard to mess it up, to be honest with you. And so I was thinking, you know, maybe an installation issue. But that did not turn out to be the case. He put the 3.5 pound connector in there and it started working fine. So I went to some forums and it looks like there are some people that actually had issues with this connector specifically doing the same thing that his is doing. Now this is a $20 part, so he didn't throw a ton of money at it, but sometimes parts are so prevalent for Glocks and sometimes they're so cheap for Glocks that it's easy to just kind of start throwing stuff at it, hoping that it works, and then you may get a result like what we just saw. And here's the thing, this is nothing against Ghost or, you know, whatever for what they make or any of the other companies. I know there's some good companies out there that make good aftermarket triggers, but the whole reason you never see any modifications, any trigger jobs on any of the guns I have really, but especially the ones I carry and keep in my home for defense, is because I don't want that used against me in court. Now, I found a really good article from concealedcarry.com, and I will link it in the description so you can check it out. But it talks about this issue. Has there ever been a case out there, and this is what some people will say, has there ever been a case out there where somebody was convicted because of putting a lighter trigger in their gun? Maybe not. But prosecutors will use anything they can against you. And one good thing they pointed out in that article is an officer actually had to use his patrol rifle, and on the inside of his dust cover, it said, "Get effed," right? And so obviously dust cover, trigger, 2 different things, but anything a prosecutor can use against you, they will, including modifications. Now, modifications have been a bigger issue, from what I understand, in negligent discharges. So when you change not only the pull of the trigger, but you change how much take-up, pre-travel, the wall, any part of that trigger pull from what the manufacturer put in their stock, and that pistol happens to go off, they will absolutely use that against you in an ND. And this is why I've talked about not only trigger modifications, but back plates and stuff, anything that's vulgar or, gives somebody the idea that you wanted to use this. It just doesn't look good for you. It may not be the nail in the coffin, so to speak, but there's no way that's really going to help you. So it could potentially cause you more issues than what it's actually worth. Now, the reason people do this specifically with Glocks is because their triggers, their stock triggers, are not that good. And so if you find yourself at the range and you're not as consistent as you want to be, or you find yourself not as consistent as you are with some of the other guns that have better triggers in them, then you naturally look for a way to make this trigger better, not your trigger finger better, and work better for you. And I say that understanding that I love a good trigger. I'm somewhat of a trigger snob. I've kind of become one over time, and it can make a big difference. Now, fundamentals are fundamentals. And so you can learn to shoot this totally stock Glock here with no issues at all, but there are things that can make it easier. So I'm not totally opposed to doing things that can help you, and I do understand that this stock Glock trigger compared to a new M&P flat face trigger, there's really no comparison. That is a much better trigger. It's also a more natural pointing gun. It's got better sights and all that stuff too. By the way, sights and all that kind of stuff, putting a red dot, I have no issue with that at all. But there is validity in changing some of these things to make it work better for you. So what do? If you can't, if you say to yourself, okay, I don't think it's worth it to change this trigger out, but I don't want an M&P or I don't want a SIG or, CZ or whatever, I like Glock. That's fine. Glock actually has a performance trigger they've come out with. It's like $100 for the trigger, the bar, it's got the connector, everything you need, and it's just a drop-in part made by Glock. And so that may be a good compromise there to go with the manufacturer of the gun and use their OEM trigger, in this case, which is a flat face trigger, and drops it to like 4 pounds. Now, if that's something you don't want to do, then practice, getting really good with this gun. Because I can assure you that while you may get some better groups, you may get, tighter groups with a better trigger in this gun, an aftermarket trigger or whatever. For self-defense purposes, in this gun, this stock configuration, you can get really good with this and feel confident in what you carry. Sometimes that's what it comes down to, is just practicing more, dry firing, all of that kind of stuff to get used to this specific trigger. So you don't have to go out and change these things. I would say don't do that, but if you're going to do that, try to go with the OEM. That includes magazines and, like I said, that performance trigger. It's $100, you get the whole thing, boom, drop it in, and I'm sure it's a better setup. I haven't used one, but I'm sure it's better. Drops it from like 5.5 pounds to 4 pounds, and it's a flat face. I think that's a pretty decent compromise, and I can't see that being as much of an issue as an aftermarket company that's adjusted the pre-travel, adjusted the pull, and potentially give them reason to come after you or use something else against you if you ever have to use your gun in self-defense. That's my opinion of it. Of course, I'd love to hear yours. If you like what I do, consider subscribing and check out one of these other videos that I've made here recently. See you on the next one, and as always, hold them down.